to episode 5 of our radio show. This is James Woodcock of Yamaha Personal Keyboard Owner. Fantastic interpretation of the track Dimoldo by Glyn Madden, editor of the Yamaha Club magazine. He recorded it especially for this edition of the radio show, so thank you, Glyn. We have an interview with Steve Marsden in a moment, but first of all, let's take a phone call.
Hello, James. My name's Barry, and I'm from South London. I've just discovered your site and listened to Volume 3 and 4, and what a great site it is. Please carry on the very good work. After attending the Yamaha demonstration, I just swapped my Tyros one for the Tyros 2, and I'm now playing on it and with it. And what great sounds. It's a pleasure to play. However, I have two little problems that your listeners may be able to help with. First, the music finder. I just cannot understand the names of the songs in the music finder. In Tyros 1, there were plenty of song names that I knew. Where have they all gone? I could find a piece of music in the songbook, look it up in the music finder, and get a good set of registrations to play it. Not in Tyros 2. I have not found one of them yet. Secondly, I've been trying out the new voices. One of the voices I'm having a problem with. I cannot get Trumpet Shake 2 to shake, even with the modulation wheel, although Trumpet Shake 1 is great. I hope somebody might be able to help me with this. Anyway, good luck and thank you for a great site. Bye.
Hi Barry, and thank you for your kind comments. It is important to note that Tyros 2 will be delivered with what's known as cryptic names for the song titles in Music Finder. This is to avoid any copyright problems. Sometimes your dealer will have done this for you, but it appears to have not been the case this time. If you do a search on Yamaha Personal Keyboard Owner for the term Music Finder, you will find a link to the article Music Finder Non-Cryptic Song Titles. Here are instructions for updating Music Finder with the song's real name instead of the more obscure cryptic versions. As for the Trumpet Shake 2 query, this instrument can add the shake sound you require by pressing the key slightly harder, which is to trigger something known as aftertouch. Remember, with any instrument within the Tyros 2, there is an information button option that appears when browsing the instruments, which is activated by pressing upper button 6 below the LCD screen. These include tips for how to get the most from the voices. Before we get to the Steve Marsden interview, I have managed to record many of the currently available styles for Tyros 2, which can be acquired through Yamaha's Internet Direct Connection, otherwise known as IDC. These include a couple of intros, A&D variations and the third ending. For a list of the premium styles used in this show, please check the YPKO radio page for further information. As you can see, the styles sound just as good as the ones that come already built in with Tyros 2. But before we show you the rest of the styles available from Internet Direct Connection, let's start the interview with Steve Marsden. Hello everybody, this is James Woodcock from Yamaha Personal Keyboard Owner. Today I have with me Steve Marsden, who is part of the Yamaha Technical Support Team and one of the many article writers for the Yamaha Club magazine. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hi James, lovely to be here.
So how did you get first involved with Yamaha UK?
Long time ago. I think probably the earliest things I actually learnt with the Yamaha Music School. When I first had a Yamaha keyboard, Mum and Dad purchased one for me. Funny enough, it was one of those that you follow the lights on, but I had a free lesson. Basically got involved with the local music shop, had Yamaha Music School lessons, and when I finished doing those, got a YTS with the job, and they said it might be a good idea that I actually trained to become a Yamaha Music School teacher, and of course you get in that way, and it all seemed to progress from there really.
So can you remember what exactly your first keyboard was?
Yes, I can do.
Go on then.
Well, there's probably two. The first keyboard that I ever had was one of those Bontempi ones from Woolworths.
Oh, lovely.
I don't know if do you remember? Are you old enough to remember these?
Probably not.
Yeah, you used to turn it on and there used to be a fan at the end, and you used to turn it and you had buttons for chords on one end and it only had one voice and that was it. But the proper one that I had with the lessons was a Yamaha PC100 with the play cards.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so I was one of those that actually started learning to play by following the lights, so it does work.
Well, actually, one of my keyboards was the Easy 250i, and that had follow lights. That was great, though.
Yeah,
it's
really good fun. It really does work.
So, how long have you been with Yamaha UK now?
Well, like I say, music school. I joined when I was 17. I then progressed through, joined as a demonstrator in 1999 for the PSR 9000, and then joined full time in 2003.
So you and your wife Jackie have written many articles for the Yamaha Club magazine. How did you first get involved with them?
To be fair, James, I really can't remember. Obviously, we knew Glyn from many, many years ago, watching him doing demonstrations and things.
Because, of course, he used to be a Yamaha demonstrator as well.
Yeah, and to be fair, he still is. He comes out now and again, obviously, when he has the time away from the club. But we'd obviously seen him, we always knew him, he was always a friend. And Glyn asked myself to do some articles for him. At the same time, I think he was asking me to do some software for some of the early keyboards, PSR 740, 640 and 540. So really it just went on from there, and just progressed and did more and more articles and bits and pieces, and just became trying to help where I can do, really.
So what sort of software did you make for these earlier keyboards?
It was purely registration software. They'd gone on the ones at settings, which were getting quite popular then. It was for, actually just thinking about it, was PSR 8000 was the very first software I ever did. And Glyn had the idea that wouldn't it be great if we actually picked a certain music book and did registrations for that particular book. And so we chose the complete keyboard player, books 1, 2, 3 and 4, and actually literally so people could actually press one button and actually have a complete sound and new style and things for that particular registration, for that song.
So what instruments have you owned? You must have had quite a few over the years.
I think I've probably owned more than I care to and want to admit, really. I've had many keyboards. Because I was an organist when I started, I think I started with the FC10, for anybody who remembers that, from about 1984. Then went on to an FE40. And then my mum and dad decided that obviously I was doing quite well in my lessons, and the music teacher decided he was going to treat me, and they got me an MC600. And I know he's probably looking at you, these model means nothing to you, but I'm sure to some people they probably will do. And from the MC, then we had an ME, an HE, and then went on to the good old EL90. And very other bits and pieces. I've had several keyboards and synths on the way as well. Just really learning, just putting things together, cables together, and seeing what worked and what didn't work and what I could blow up, really.
So, how do you perceive an organ compared to a keyboard? What do you think are the disadvantages and advantages of either one?
I think both are instruments in their own right. Obviously the organ's great because you play everything live, you can play everything live, and I think Glyn's already mentioned in the past with other interviews, you can just sit down and play it. The keyboards, obviously you've got the styles, you are playing with a style, but I think for musicality and fun they're great, and especially with the latest like the Tyros, they've really got the expressiveness that you can now get from an organ as well, and especially with like the fingered AI. personally, I find it just as challenging as what the organ used to be, but to be fair, a lot more fun as well.
Would you say the keyboard is much more open to the beginner, where the organ may have been a little bit more daunting?
I think possibly. I think because it looks like you've got more to do. You've got 2 hands, 2 keyboards, and something to do with both your feet. With a keyboard, you haven't got to do that. And if I'm honest, I think it was down to the individual person. If you wanted to play the organ, then you would do the organ. If you wanted to play the keyboard, then the keyboard was the right thing for yourself. I think it's like anything these days. If you want, to me, playing a piano is actually harder than playing the organ or the keyboard. But some other people playing the piano is a lot easier than playing an organ. So it depends on the individual person, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you and Jackie do quite a few articles on AI chords. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, what exactly is an AI chord?
An AI chord, probably it's not so much an AI chord. It's a technique that you can use. For example, with the keyboards, as you know, you play a C chord, the triad G, C and E, or C, E, G, whatever you want to play, and the accompaniment section of the keyboard plays a bass line that's pre-programmed for you. But with AI, what you can do is you can actually force the bass line to actually play a bass in real time. So you can play proper cadences, fix things like C chord with a G bass, or C chord with maybe like a B flat bass, or an E bass, or whichever kind of bass line that the tune actually requires at that time. So like you get the flexibilities of the organ, but on a keyboard front.
Which is great, really, isn't it?
Much more musical. It also makes your brain work harder, because you're actually now thinking not right hand and left hand, but you're thinking right hand tune, left hand chords, and also left hand bass line. So if you've watched anybody, for example, like James, especially Martin Harris, Richard Bauer, amongst others, when they're playing, especially if you look at the chord symbols, if you ever watch them when they've got the screens up, you'll see the chords changing very, very frequently. And that's exactly what they're doing, and it does make the style sound much more interesting and the music much better.
And add so much character to a piece, which ordinarily wouldn't exist if you didn't use something like AI.
Well, yeah, and it also makes you individual again, whereby, again, if you have somebody playing a style who's a very, very good player and somebody who's maybe not such a good player, if they just hit a chord, they both sound exactly the same. But with Fingered Eye, you put yourself into the music, and I think that's probably where the benefits are.
I suppose it's the experimentation as well you can do with it.
Yeah, and I mean other tunes like, for example, Air on a G string, which is famous for its walking bass line, and of course with a standard keyboard with that kind of feature, it's quite difficult to do that. I mean, a lot of keyboards have these on bass feature, whereby it always picks the bottom note to play the bass line, which is great, but sometimes it's just quite hard work if you actually then got to play different chords and you've got to think different inversions. Fingered Eye, you can actually do it manually, and you don't have to think of all those different inversions, it just works.
Before we listen to the second part of that interview, we're actually going to show a performance using AI chords. This is Steve Marsden's arrangement of Ode to Joy. Now back to the interview with Steve Marsden. So, out of all the instruments you've had, be it keyboard or organ or digital piano, which would you say is your personal favourite?
Of ones that I've owned or ones that I've wanted to own?
Oh, it could be both. As long as you played it.
It's a bit weird. It's a bit of a silly question, really, for myself, because there's always... I've got favourites for no particular reason.
Yeah.
Such as, like, for example, one that I never owned but always wanted to own was an Yamaha FX20 organ. Now, that's going back from 1983, but loved the rhythm unit, and it was the first digital organ. I know Jackie loved the D85, and so do I. More modern, obviously the L90 I think has to be a key one. That was great, and of course Tyros as well. I've always used to like some people will remember a model called the PSR SQ16. Oh God, I'm sounding like an anorak, aren't I? Basically, the SQ16 was around the early 90s, and it was the first one that Yamaha had done with lots and lots of sequencing facilities. It wasn't the easiest keyboard in the world to own, but it was, once you got into it, it was really, really good to play. Fantastic sound. So there's that one. Things like, for example, one at the minute that I really love is the PSR E303. Retails £150, but what a fantastic sound, and just really nice to play. So I think really it's different models for different reasons. So, but yeah, I think probably if I had to pick one, probably Tyros.
That's a good choice.
Yeah.
I mean, it was certainly Tyros that brought me into the Yamaha universe of just how far technology had come along.
Yes, I know, because obviously you had one. That's how I think you got started in all this, wasn't it? You wanted to get involved and...
Well, yes, it was the Tyros that made me think, hey, this is something really special, and I want to do something to show my love for the Yamaha instrument. So what instruments do you actually own at home?
Well, we've got a Tyros 1 at the minute, which is upstairs, and we have a Grand Touch piano downstairs, which actually we're sat right next to now.
And it looks very nice.
It's very nice, yes.
So, over the years, which is the most interesting advancement in the technology for you?
I think probably the way that the styles react. I think AI, probably is the most beneficial thing for myself. Obviously, people will say, oh, the sound quality, but obviously sounds are going to improve anyway. But I think the fact that the styles now are much more controllable for live performance, and I think that's probably, for myself, the most important thing. A lot of people use sequencing, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's a great feature, and I know a lot of people get a lot of pleasure for it, but for myself, I just like to sit down and play the instrument live, and especially coming from an organ background, if I can make the music sound as natural as possible, then that's probably what I want to do. So probably the styles and the way that they actually react.
Well, that was a strong component of having an organ, wasn't it? Everything was live. So if you can bring an element of that to the keyboard world, it's far more entertaining to watch as well.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing. I think when you watch, I know a lot of people say they go to organ clubs and keyboard clubs and watch people play. I think that's one of the probably the downsides of the keyboard. It's probably not so entertaining to look at. Although I know for a fact when I used to do organ concerts around the country before I joined Yamaha, and I'm thinking in the later years I went on to Tyros and just took Tyros out. For myself, actually doing a Tyros concert was harder than actually taking the organ out, which I know to maybe people will say, well, that should be the other way around, but actually you've got to think more because obviously using these styles and making it sound and revoicing everything. But I know from comments from people who were watching, a number of people actually said actually they preferred the concert on the Tyros than the organ, but visually wasn't quite so appealing.
So of course we can't have an interview without mentioning the latest flagship keyboard from Yamaha, which of course is the Tyros 2. Now, the first thing I noticed when I had a go on one of these was, although everything like the super articulation voices were just superb, the first thing that hit me was the increase in sound fidelity. It just sounded so much sharper and crisper. Now, what would you attribute that to?
I think it's probably, obviously it's got a new bigger sound chip in it than Tyros 1. I think I was told something about, they class it differently than Tyros 1, but it's about over 300 megabytes of linear based sampling. But I think it's just the new technology they're using now for sampling and the way it works. Just new technologies coming along, and it will get better.
So, of course, the Tyros 2 has many voices. We're talking well over 1,000, aren't we?
Yes.
So, how are these recorded and sampled to be used in a keyboard?
Right, I think with it's very simple to say that with most manufacturers, you to get the original instrument into a studio, you take all the raw recordings, and then they're sent to certain members of teams who then manipulate the sound and make them playable. These are done then in special ways, especially with the super articulation. They're processed, added EQ to them, effects, really to make them into the voices that you see today, and then they're obviously put on the keyboard.
So in particular, the super articulation voices must be incredibly difficult because there are so many subtle little sounds in the background they're trying to put in, such as the slides and fret noises.
Yes.
For guitars, for example. That must add a lot of time to create.
A lot of care and attention has gone into Tyros 2, and I think one of the main things between Tyros 1 and Tyros 2 is the care to detail that's gone into it. This is what a lot of end user customers have said to us, is they want these sounds to react better. They want the actual sounds to be more live. They want them to actually react in a more natural way. And one of the criticisms, of course, was that you couldn't play Mega Voices live.
That was for Tyros 1.
For Tyros 1, PSR 3000. Well, Mega Voices really in these instruments have never been designed to be played live. They were used for the programmers and especially in the style departments. Super articulation has been brought out really to kind of sort that problem out. So you, for example, the super articulation guitar, you play the guitar as you would normally play the guitar. The keyboard takes care of where there should be slaps, bangs, slides, twangs, whatever. It just sorts it, and it knows from the information that obviously we programmed into it that if a real guitarist would do a certain thing and it would twang, then the keyboard will try and do the same thing, and it works on velocity and intervals. It's very clever.
It's important to note though, with practice, it can be also triggered by the user rather than it just taking over and doing everything.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, that's one thing. I think practice makes perfect, and I think that's one of the things that you'll notice now with keyboards as we go on, with voices getting better. The instruments sound different depending on how you play them. And a great feature is to listen to the demos, because you can actually hear how these samples are played, and you can. I mean, they are the same voices of what's in the product itself, but they are played as the real instrument would be played. And again, I know for a fact where people say, "Oh, this doesn't sound quite like a, I don't know, for example, a vibraphone." And you say, well, actually, okay, let's play this in the key or the area that a vibraphone can actually play in. And suddenly say, oh, that sounds like a different voice. So well, actually, it's the same one but played naturally. Same thing with things like trumpets, flutes. You've got to think to yourself, okay, when you played it, this trumpet has got to breathe. This flute player's got to breathe. You would play this in this certain way. And that, I think, makes a big difference to how an instrument sounds, regardless of the quality of the sound.
And of course on the Tyros 2 there's actually an option to look at information for that particular instrument and how you can use it to play.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen it, when you pick a voice, there's a little button there marked information, and especially with the super articulation, it will tell you exactly what would happen. For example, with the trumpets, if you press hard or you move the modulation wheel. So, and that's actually quite a question we get asked quite a lot is, how do I make this instrument do what I've heard on the demonstration? And a lot of people overlook there's a little button there marked information, and it actually tells you there.
And it also includes things like information of aftertouch as well, doesn't it?
Aftertouch, and also what the super articulation pedal does as well. If you press obviously, whether you get a breath sound or a slide or whichever kind of thing the instrument's there to do for you.
So how would you explain aftertouch? Because it's a little bit confusing to some people of what is aftertouch.
Aftertouch is after you've played the note, you then got like a second touch of obviously what the instrument would do. I mean, probably an easy way to say that is, or an easy way to answer that would be, if you look at a violin player, when they actually play a note on a violin, they've got the bow, which obviously plays the string. But if you look at their fingers on the neck, after a while you'll see it actually move, and that gives you the vibrato effect. And depending on how much they actually move, will actually mean how much vibrato you get. Aftertouch in certain instruments, if you press harder on that, will give you that kind of same effect. That's one option. I mean, but obviously aftertouch on different instruments does different things, but that's probably the easiest way of explaining it.
And there's so many instruments that take advantage of super articulation. You've got your string sections, you've got your guitars in particular. But what other instruments can we see not super articulation?
Organs, obviously, because there's the organ sounds there with which was actually we picked a load of organs off eBay. Funny enough, that's how we sampled those and brought them into Yamaha and recorded them. So you've got some of the organ sounds, particularly most of the sounds there. The strings, I said, trumpets, flutes, from memory. You haven't got super articulation to things like the piano department, because obviously there's no real need for that there. But really, if you just keep going through the instruments there, you'll see lots of guitars, basses, brass sounds. And again, the effects that the super articulation will do will depend purely on how the instruments are designed to be played.
And for the organ sounds, you can actually use the modulation wheel in a different way on Tyros 2, can't you?
That's right. Obviously, with modulation wheel on a lot of instruments, it just has like a kind of wobble sound, but like a vibrato sound. But with Tyros 2, you've got the good old Leslie speaker going round, and you can control the rate of which it's spinning.
So Tyros 2 also has the way you can expand with memory, so you can actually download extra voices.
Yeah.
So how does this work? Which is the best way to get the most out of it?
Ooh, depends on how you want to use it, really. I know, for example, some people are recording their own voices, using instruments. I know a particular person I was speaking to recently. They've been using it to actually record a vocal line into it in time. It takes quite a bit of doing, but I've heard the results and it's quite good. Actually, whereby they're actually playing, they hit a multipad and it sings the chorus with them. It's quite a novel idea. Some people actually use it for multipad sounds. Some people actually do it for new voices. I know for a fact somebody's actually put some instruments in, some Eastern sounding instruments that are not currently available. They've actually recorded themselves, done multi-sample settings, taken a lot of time over it, and by all accounts the results are getting quite good.
So again, it's some way of individualising a piece of music with the ability to record other sounds, other voices.
Yeah, it is. And also I think the great thing about it is if you want a particular instrument, fine, go and record it. It's there for you to do.
So it's all in WAV format, isn't it?
It's all in WAV format. I think one of the key issues on this is it does take quite a bit of practice to do, and the more you do it, the better you get. I think that's probably a very, very important lesson to learn with it.
But it's sort of, again, an experimentation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I'm not saying it's difficult to do with, obviously, within the product, because it's fairly self-explanatory, but it actually takes a lot of experience to actually get those voices right, and knowing how they play and where the sound should change. And when you're actually trying to program this, you actually suddenly realise how good the actual people putting the original sound of the instrument actually are.
From someone who's gone from Tyros 1 to Tyros 2, hard disk digital recording, for me, I love recording quality.
Yes.
And although it's great to get an analog output, if you can keep everything in the digital realm,
you get a much better sound quality.
Exactly. So having a hard disk gives you that advantage.
Yes.
Plus you've got the advantage of being able to download through now what's available, Internet Direct Connection with Tyros 2, which wasn't previously available with Tyros 1.
Yes.
So what is Internet Direct Connection?
Internet Direct Connection, or can we just call it IDC, because it's actually easier to say. IDC really is just a way that your keyboard can connect to the internet, connect to Yamaha's dedicated website to download new software, new styles, MIDI files. There's lessons on there as well. It's just a way Yamaha are introducing a way that you can actually download content for your instrument without having to go through the computer. Then we are aware that there's quite a few people who aren't great with computers, or maybe they want to download something and somebody else is using the computer. It's also quite a lot more powerful in one way, because the servo in New York can actually talk to your keyboard directly and make sure things are downloaded correctly. And to be fair, it's a great innovation, and I think it will be extremely good in years to come.
Would you say it's a particularly early part in its life, and it's got a lot of years to go where it can actually become better and better over time?
I think it's going to grow and grow, and to be fair, seeing what they've done with it already and the ideas that they've already put in place for it, I think it's fantastic, and I think it will. I think like the early days of MIDI, when MIDI started, it was very limited, and we can now see what we do with MIDI these days. But I think with IDC, it's going to be probably one of the key points in years to come.
So, Tyros 2, how would you define it? Would you just say it's an amazing musical instrument or a technological marvel?
Oh,
because this is really an argument that people can come to you with, isn't it? You know, is this a great bit of technology because it's got this really fast sound chip and it's got all this memory?
Okay, let's answer it this way then. It's a masterpiece of technology which makes a wonderful musical instrument.
Right.
How does that answer? Yeah.
But how do you think the two balance?
I think they go hand in hand. I think they really do. I do think that it's the one thing that we have to be careful of is that we don't start putting technology on things just for the sake of it. Yes. I think that's a key issue. I do know for a fact that you look at certain other parts of industries whereby, for example, okay, let's look at mobile phones, for example. You've got now phones that take video, that take pictures, that you can watch TV on in certain occasions now as well. I think that's great. But having said that, if I break down on the M1, I just want to make sure I can make a phone call. So I think we need to make sure that we get the basics in place first before we start taking things too far. And I think that's one thing with a musical instrument we have to be careful of, is that, you know, we don't lose the fact it is a musical instrument. I think a lot of people think that it's a computer with a set of keys on. Okay, it's got a circuit board and it's got an operating system, but it's a musical instrument, and that's where it is.
Do you think keyboards aren't considered cool enough for the young generation now? I mean, it must have been always a problem.
I think it depends on where you are. I think different countries have different views on it. I know in places like Japan and East Asia, it's very cool to play an organ, which in the UK is like, oh, you play one of those church organ things. But you can go to places like Japan and you see people playing the electones, or that's obviously the Yamaha's name for the organs, and there's pop bands and they're fantastic players. I know in America it's probably a bit more cool to play synths and things like that, although there's a load of good players out there. So I think it depends on where you are. I don't think there's a problem as such, but I think at the minute it's probably a bit cooler to play guitar. I think it depends on the current state of pop music at the time. I think if somebody went on Top of the Pops and made lots and lots of money with a church organ, for example, it would be cool to play a church organ. So I think it all depends on what the trends are of the day.
Definitely, I would agree with that. So how did you acquire all your technical expertise? Because you must be asked an absolute myriad of questions, from very basic questions to the very advanced, so you must have to have a wide spectrum first of all.
Do you know what? I really don't know how I actually got it. I'm not the brainiest person in the world. I think I just know a lot of things that probably are useful in certain situations. My dad puts it, a lot of nothing, you know. When I was younger, I had these keyboards, and from early on we said we had quite a bit of it. I used to like wiring things up, and we used to have like spaghetti, and my mum used to go in and say, oh, for God's sake, we've got cables going everywhere. So yes, I was that person that had that organ connected to that keyboard, connected to that drum machine, connected to that expander, and then tried to do it differently and things like that. So I've always been one to fiddle with wires and seeing what works, and having lots of different modules and things like that, and just really seeing how things work. And I've always had a kind of like interest in that. So I think probably, to be fair, it's just things that you've done when you were younger, and just really just playing and just seeing what works. I've never been frightened of pressing buttons, and I don't read owner's manuals. I have to say I'm one of those people that really don't read it. I find it's much easier to actually press buttons and see what happens, and if it goes wrong, then okay, start again.
Well, it doesn't matter how big the manual is, does it? And the reference it covers, it comes down to a point where you just need to experiment and have a look at what everything does.
I think you learn a lot more by doing it. Obviously the manual's there as a great reference point. I think if with a manual you see a button that you particularly don't know what that feature is, and you've pressed it and really not sure, then it's good to actually read it to make sure that obviously you've done it correctly. Or if you're not sure what it does, then obviously it gives you kind of an outline of what it does. But I think you really learn by actually using a particular feature, and that's probably what I did in the past. I used to find it with MIDI and computers. Or how does this work? Okay, you learn by your mistakes, and I definitely did.
So you were a demonstrator at some point. How did you get into demonstrating?
Again, it was advertised in the magazine, and I'd known Andy Garville and the guys obviously from the music school, and I saw it. I thought, I'm going to apply for that. I've always fancied doing. I'd always wanted to be a demonstrator, and applied for the job, and I joined with the likes of Richard Bauer, and there were some other demonstrators there at the time. Obviously, Glyn was there, and it was great. I have to say, the car travelling probably wasn't as glamorous as I wanted it to be. I think when I joined Yamaha, it was full time. It was more of an internal kind of desk job, so it really just came into the fact that I still went on the odd show and things like that for them, and a lot of product launches, but I sort of like moved out of it, and obviously now I'm in there full time, apart from the very odd time that I'm needed. If I'm on best behaviour, I'm allowed out, kind of thing. But I think now I've got out of it, I actually like coming home at night.
So you must have other interests than just keyboard and organ playing. What do you do to relax?
I think like most people, like yourself, I have an Xbox, so I like the old car racing games, like the Formula 1, watching DVDs. As anyone who's seen my picture on the site, I don't actually look like four legs and blonde. Yes, I actually live with three blondes, two of which are furry.
So that's two dogs.
Yeah, that's right. So I think they take up a lot of my time. So I think probably I have to say I don't really do a lot. One thing I don't do is play a lot at home. I think a lot of people have this kind of thought that you must play a lot at home, but actually when you spend all day with it all week, when you get home, the last thing you want to do is play.
So you sit in front of the Xbox?
I have been known to. I know basically I like to have a lot of fights with the wife on Dead or Alive, so it's quite, she normally wins, although I have to say, my niece, who's a lot younger than us, as you can imagine, will beat us both.
So you do have two lovely dogs, they're sitting very close by. What breed are they?
They're golden retrievers, although they're both golden, they don't retrieve anything. So, yes, they're both two golden retrievers. One's Jasper, who's 10, and Millie, who's 2.
So have you had dogs for a long time?
No, Jasper was actually my first. Jackie has always had dogs, obviously, when she was younger. I always wanted a dog, and then we ended up with Jasper. So we were still waiting for a dog, and then we got Millie. But no, seriously, I've always wanted them, and really glad that we've got them. They're great to take out when you've had a really hard day and you're really fed up, because you've got something wrong, or you. To be fair, if you've been practicing something and it hasn't gone right or whatever, it's great because you can come home and they're there and they're always happy to see you, and you can go out for a walk, and it's good to have them. They're good therapy.
So you've been a demonstrator. You've been in marketing, you've been in technical support, and you've also been a teacher in the past. So what was the teaching experience like for you?
It was great. It was very interesting. It probably was, because obviously being with Yamaha Music Schools, it was great because I'd obviously learnt with them, and so I knew the techniques that they'd had. I think it's very good because it shows it from a different angle. For anybody who wants to really improve their playing, teach. I know that sounds like a really silly thing to say, but when you've got to teach somebody else a particular element, you've got to be really sure of it yourself. So actually, although you're teaching somebody else, you're practicing it yourself as well. But no, it's really good to do.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Steve.
That's right, it's been a pleasure.
Great, and I hope everyone else has enjoyed it. Now, before we finish this edition of the show, let's listen to the rest of those IDC styles. And on that note, that's it for this edition of YPKO Radio Volume 5. I look forward to seeing you next time.